Hashtag the hook in the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that transcends species, technology, and time itself. Loyalty knows no boundaries. It doesn't care about the shape of your skull, the color of your blood, or whether you breathe oxygen or methane. It doesn't distinguish between predator and prey, between the hunter and the hunted. Sometimes, the greatest bonds are forged not in moments of triumph, but in the darkest hours when death whispers your name and hope seems like a cruel joke. Sometimes, salvation comes from the most unexpected source, from those who should be your enemies, who have every reason to leave you behind, yet choose to see something worth saving in your dying eyes. This is the story of such a bond. A story that would reshape the understanding between two species locked in bitter warfare. A story that began with abandonment and betrayal, yet bloomed into something that military historians would later call the incident that changed everything. It started with a creature left to die alone on a blood-soaked battlefield, and ended with a revelation that would shake the very foundations of galactic warfare. Because sometimes, the enemy of your enemy isn't just your friend, sometimes, they become family. The crimson sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the devastated battlefield as Private Marcus Chen picked his way through the debris of what had been, just hours earlier, a thriving Terran forward operating base. The acrid smell of burning plastics and melted metal filled his nostrils through his suit's filters, mixing with something else, something organic and wrong that made his stomach turn. "Jesus Christ," whispered Corporal Sarah Martinez, her voice crackling through the comm system. "Look at this mess." Marcus nodded grimly, his assault rifle sweeping left and right as he scanned for any signs of movement among the wreckage. The Zephyrian attack had been swift and brutal, their biomechanical war machines tearing through the human defenses like paper. What should have been a routine supply run had turned into a massacre that would be talked about in military academies for generations to come. The base's main structure had been reduced to twisted metal and scattered concrete. Vehicles lay overturned and burning, their crews either evacuated or. Marcus didn't want to think about the alternative. The emergency beacon that had drawn their rescue team here was still pinging weakly from somewhere in the ruins, a forlorn electronic cry for help that seemed to mock the silence around them. "Movement, 2 o'clock, reported Sergeant Williams from his position near what used to be the command center. Could be survivors." Marcus adjusted his grip on his weapon and moved toward the indicated position, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The Zephyrians were known for leaving traps and sensors behind after their raids, biomechanical nightmares that could tear a man in half before he even knew they were there. Every step forward was a calculated risk. As they rounded a collapsed wall, Marcus saw what had caught Williams' attention. There, partially buried under a section of fallen ceiling, something was moving. At first glance, it looked like a piece of Zephyrian technology, all sleek curves and organic-looking metal that seemed to pulse with its own inner life. But, as they got closer, Marcus realized it wasn't technology at all. It was alive. The creature was roughly the size of a large dog, maybe 90 pounds, but its resemblance to any Earth animal ended there. Its body was covered in what looked like natural armor plating, a deep purple-black that shifted and moved like liquid metal. 6 legs ending in razor-sharp claws were pinned beneath the debris, and an elongated head with multiple eyes and sensor organs lay at an awkward angle that suggested serious injury. "Holy shit," Martinez breathed. "Is that a Zephyrian warhound?" Marcus had heard stories about the creatures but had never seen one up close. They were supposed to be the ultimate biological weapons, faster than any human, stronger than powered armor, and loyal unto death to their Zephyrian handlers. Military intelligence called them the perfect killers, bred and trained from birth for one purpose, hunting and destroying human soldiers. And this one was dying. The creature's breathing was labored, each breath producing a wet, rattling sound that spoke of internal injuries. One of its sensor stalks had been completely severed, leaking a phosphorescent blue fluid that pooled beneath its head. Multiple fractures were visible in its armored carapace, and its lower legs were clearly broken. "We should put it out of its misery and move on," Williams said, raising his sidearm. "These things have killed hundreds of our people." But Marcus found himself hesitating. There was something in the creature's remaining eyes, a quality he recognized but couldn't quite name. Pain, yes, and fear, but something else. Something almost human. "Wait," he said, surprising himself. Look around. Where are its handlers? Where are the other Zephyrians? The question hung in the air as they all took in the implications. Every intelligence report they'd ever received stated that warhounds never operated alone. They were always part of a pack, always accompanied by at least 2 handlers. The bonds between hound and handler were supposed to be unbreakable, forged through genetic manipulation and psychic conditioning. Yet here was this creature, alone and abandoned in the ruins of a human base. Maybe its handlers are dead, Martinez suggested. Killed in the fighting. Maybe, Marcus said slowly. Or maybe they left it behind. The thought was unsettling. Everything they'd been told about Zephyrian military doctrine emphasized the value they placed on their biological assets. Warhounds were expensive to breed and train. They weren't supposed to be expendable. The creature's eyes tracked their movement weakly, but it made no attempt to attack or even growl. If anything, it seemed to be trying to make itself smaller, pulling its injured legs closer to its body in what looked suspiciously like a defensive posture. The gesture was so familiar, so reminiscent of wounded animals Marcus had seen back on Earth, that he felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "Sir," Williams said, his tone making it clear he thought Marcus was making a mistake. "We have a mission to complete. The beacon is still active, which means there might be human survivors who need our help. We can't waste time on an enemy combatant, wounded or not." Marcus knew Williams was right. Every minute they spent here increased the chance that Zephyrian reinforcements would arrive. Their extraction window was narrow, and they had already spent too much time on reconnaissance. But something about the situation bothered him on a level he couldn't quite articulate. "Martinez, scan for other life signs in a 50-meter radius," he ordered. "Williams, keep watch for hostiles. I want to take a closer look at this thing." Marcus approached the pinned creature slowly, weapon ready but not directly aimed. The warhound's eyes followed his movement, but its breathing had become even more labored. Up close, he could see that its injuries were extensive, far worse than he'd initially realized. Internal bleeding was evident from the blue fluid seeping from its mouth and nose, and the way it held its head suggested possible spinal damage. This wasn't a creature that would be getting up anytime soon, if ever. As he knelt beside the debris pile, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. The section of ceiling that had collapsed on the warhound wasn't random debris from the Zephyrian attack. The blast pattern and the nature of the damage suggested it had been brought down deliberately, from the inside. Someone had triggered a localized explosion, bringing down this specific section of the building. But why would the Zephyrians booby-trap their own warhound? "Life signs are negative for humanoid contacts," Martinez reported. "But I'm reading something weird from the hound. Its biorhythms are all over the place, like it's in some kind of distress beyond just the physical injuries." "Distress how? Psychological, maybe? The readings look similar to what we see in humans suffering from severe trauma or abandonment anxiety. If I didn't know better, I'd say this thing is experiencing emotional distress." The idea should have been absurd. Warhounds were biological weapons, bred for killing. They weren't supposed to have emotions beyond basic aggression and loyalty programming. But, as Marcus looked into the creature's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that Martinez might be right. "Sir, we really need to move," Williams urged. "I'm picking up electromagnetic signatures that could indicate incoming aircraft." Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for weeks afterward. Instead of following protocol, instead of eliminating a potential threat and moving on with the mission, he found himself reaching for his field medical kit. "What are you doing?" Williams demanded. "Something stupid, probably," Marcus admitted. But he was already injecting the warhound with a broad-spectrum painkiller from his emergency supplies. The creature's eyes widened in what looked like surprise, then gradually began to close as the medication took effect. The implications of his action didn't fully hit him until later. He had just administered medical aid to an enemy combatant, not just any enemy, but a biological weapon specifically designed to kill humans. By any reasonable military standard, it was an act of either supreme compassion or complete insanity. Probably both. As the painkiller worked its way through the creature's system, its breathing became less labored and some of the tension left its body. For a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw something like gratitude in its alien eyes before they closed completely. "Contact, incoming aircraft, bearing 270, Williams reported urgently. We need to extract now, or we're going to be trapped here." Marcus stood up, shouldering his rifle, but found himself reluctant to leave. The Warhound was stable for now, but without proper medical attention, it would be dead within hours. Its handlers had clearly abandoned it to die, writing it off as an acceptable loss. In a few hours, scavengers would reduce it to bones and scattered armor plating. It seemed like a waste of something that had probably never asked to be created as a weapon. Moving to extraction point, he reported over the comm, but, as they moved away from the ruins, Marcus found himself looking back. The Warhound had opened its eyes again and was watching them leave with an expression that seemed almost wistful. 40 minutes later, as their transport lifted off from the planet's surface, Marcus was still thinking about those eyes. About abandonment and loyalty and the casual way that war turned living beings into disposable assets. He'd seen enough human soldiers abandoned on battlefields to recognize the look of betrayal when he saw it, regardless of the species it appeared on. The official after-action report would list the mission as a complete success. No human survivors found, but valuable intelligence gathered about Zephyrian tactics and equipment. The Warhound wasn't mentioned at all, classified as irrelevant to the mission objectives. But Marcus knew he would remember those eyes for a long time to come. 3 days later, while reviewing satellite imagery of the battlefield for his formal report, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. The section of ruins where they'd found the Warhound was empty. No body, no remains, nothing but scattered debris and a few patches of dried blue fluid. Either scavengers had been unusually thorough, or the creature had somehow survived and crawled away to die somewhere else. Marcus told himself it didn't matter. The Warhound was just another casualty of a conflict that had already claimed too many lives on both sides. Whatever had happened to it after they left was irrelevant to the larger strategic picture. But, late at night, when the nightmares came in, he found himself reliving the moment when he'd looked into those alien eyes and seen something achingly familiar looking back. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake in leaving. Not the mistake of showing mercy to an enemy. The mistake of not showing enough. 6 weeks after the incident at FOB Delta 7, Private Marcus Chen found himself stationed at Outpost Meridian, a sprawling research facility built into the side of a mountain on the contested world of New Sarajevo. The posting was supposed to be routine guard duty while xenobiologists and tactical analysts studied captured Zephyrian technology. It was the kind of assignment that soldiers got when command wanted them somewhere safe and out of the way. Marcus suspected his transfer had more to do with the questions he'd been asking about abandoned warhounds than with any need for additional security at the research station. The nightmares hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd gotten worse. 3 times a week, sometimes more, he would wake up in a cold sweat, remembering eyes that held too much intelligence and understanding for a mere biological weapon. He'd started avoiding the base psychiatrist, knowing that any mention of emotional distress over an enemy creature would earn him a one-way ticket to a psychological evaluation that would end his military career. So he kept his mouth shut and did his job, patrolling the perimeter of a facility that studied the very creatures that haunted his dreams. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the kind of scientist who made Marcus nervous. She had the intense, focused demeanor of someone who saw the universe as a series of problems to be solved, and she asked the sort of probing questions that suggested she knew more about his recent service record than she was letting on. "Private Chen," she said one morning as he was conducting his routine security check of Lab 7. "I've been reviewing some interesting footage from your unit's recent operations. Would you mind taking a look at something?" Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. "Of course, Doctor." The lab's main display screen flickered to life, showing aerial reconnaissance footage from FOB Delta 7. Marcus recognized the ruins immediately, but the timestamp showed the footage had been taken 2 weeks after his team's extraction, long after he'd last seen the wounded warhound. "Watch carefully," Dr. Vasquez said, pointing to a section of the ruins with her laser pointer. "There." At first, Marcus didn't see anything unusual. Just the same scattered debris and collapsed structures he remembered. But then, something moved in the shadows near what had been the command center. Something dark and low to the ground, moving with obvious difficulty but moving nonetheless. The Warhound was alive. This footage was captured by a reconnaissance drone during a follow-up survey, Dr. Vasquez explained. What makes it interesting is what the creature is doing. As Marcus watched, the Warhound emerged more fully from the shadows, and he could see that it was carrying something in its mouth. Something that looked suspiciously like pieces of human equipment, fragments of communication gear, medical supplies, bits of armor plating that bore Terran military markings. It's collecting our equipment, Marcus said, unable to keep the surprise out of his voice. More than that. Watch the pattern of its movement. The Warhound was indeed following a specific pattern, moving systematically through the ruins and gathering specific items. Not randomly scavenging, but searching for particular pieces of technology. And every few minutes, it would stop and look directly up at the surveillance drone, as if it knew it was being watched. As if it wanted to be watched. Doctor, what exactly am I looking at here? Dr. Vasquez paused the footage and turned to face him. Something that shouldn't exist, private. According to everything we know about Zephyrian military biology, Warhounds are incapable of independent operation for more than 72 hours after separation from their handlers. Their neural conditioning requires constant psychic reinforcement, or they enter a catatonic state and die. She gestured to the frozen image on the screen. This footage was taken 18 days after the attack on Delta 7. That creature should have been dead 2 weeks before the drone ever saw it. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing. Maybe our intelligence is wrong. Maybe the conditioning isn't as strict as we thought. That was my initial hypothesis, Dr. Vasquez agreed. Until we receive this. She switched to a different display, showing what looked like a crude communication beacon constructed from salvaged human and Zephyrian technology. The device was clearly improvised, held together with what appeared to be biological adhesive that Marcus recognized as a secretion produced by Warhounds for emergency repairs to their equipment. The beacon was broadcasting on an open Terran emergency frequency, Dr. Vasquez continued. Repeating the same message over and over again for 6 days before we finally located its source. What message? Instead of answering, Dr. Vasquez activated the audio playback. What came through the speakers was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, a series of electronic tones and pulses that had been modulated to approximate human speech patterns. The voice was artificial, clearly generated by jury-rigged technology, but the words it spoke were unmistakably English. Help, Kurt, alone, help, please, Kurt, alone. The simple plea, repeated over and over in that strange mechanical voice, hit Marcus like a physical blow. He found himself gripping the edge of the lab table to steady himself as the implications sank in. It learned English, he said quietly. It learned to speak English and built a communication device to call for help. That's impossible, Dr. Vasquez said, but her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as Marcus. Warhounds don't have the cognitive capacity for language acquisition. They're bred specifically to be intelligent enough to follow complex tactical instructions but not intelligent enough to question orders or develop independent thought. Marcus looked at the frozen image of the Warhound on the screen, remembering the intelligence he'd seen in its eyes during their brief encounter. Maybe the breeding program isn't as precise as the Zephyrians think it is. Or maybe this particular specimen is an anomaly, Dr. Vasquez mused. A genetic outlier that developed capabilities beyond the normal parameters. Doctor, what happened to the beacon? Did anyone respond to its distress call? Dr. Vasquez hesitated, and Marcus could see she was wrestling with something. That's complicated, private. Command classified the beacon as a potential security threat. The concern was that it might be some sort of Zephyrian trap or psychological warfare operation. So they destroyed it. They authorized a precision strike to eliminate what they classified as anomalous enemy technology. The strike was carried out 3 days ago. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. And the Warhound? Unknown. The blast crater makes it difficult to determine if there were any biological remains. For a long moment, Marcus stared at the screen in silence. He thought about the Warhound dragging itself through the ruins with broken legs, learning to speak an alien language through sheer determination, building a communication device with whatever salvage it could find. All for the chance to call for help from the same species its creators had trained it to kill. And humanity's response had been to blow it up. "Doctor, why are you showing me this?" Dr. Vasquez shut off the display and turned to face him fully. "Because according to my research, you were the last human to have direct contact with this creature. And because I think you administered medical aid to it during your extraction from Delta 7. Marcus kept his expression carefully neutral, but he could feel sweat beading on his forehead. Providing aid to enemy combatants without authorization was a court-martial offense. "I don't know what you're talking about, Doctor." "Private, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm trying to understand something that could fundamentally change how we approach this war. If warhounds are capable of cognitive development beyond their programming, if they can learn and adapt and even develop what appears to be emotional responses, then we need to reconsider our entire understanding of Zephyrian military biology." She paused, studying his face. "But, more importantly, if this creature was abandoned by its handlers and actively sought help from humans, it suggests that the loyalty conditioning that supposedly makes warhounds absolutely devoted to their creators might not be as unbreakable as we thought." Marcus realized where she was going with this. "You think it was trying to defect? I think it was trying to survive. And I think it recognized that humans were more likely to help it than the Zephyrians who bred it to be expendable." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "Private, I need to know exactly what happened during your encounter with this creature. Not for any official report, but because understanding its behavior might be the key to developing new strategies for dealing with Zephyrian biological weapons." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. "I gave it a painkiller injection," he admitted. "It was clearly suffering, and it made no attempt to attack us despite being a trained killing machine. There was something in its eyes, something that reminded me of wounded soldiers I'd seen. Humans who had been abandoned by their own command and left to die." Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. "And how did it respond to the medical aid?" "Like it was grateful. Like it understood what I was trying to do." Marcus paused, remembering. "Doctor, I've been having dreams about that creature for weeks. Dreams where it's trying to tell me something important, something that could change everything about this war." "I know how that sounds, but it sounds like the response of a decent human being to an act of inexplicable cruelty," Dr. Vasquez interrupted. "Private, what would you say if I told you that the warhound at Delta 7 might not have been the only one of its kind? What if I told you that we've been receiving similar distress signals from 3 other contested systems?" Marcus felt his world shift. "You're saying there are more of them? More warhounds trying to defect?" "I'm saying that something is happening within Zephyrian military biology that their command structure either doesn't know about or doesn't want to acknowledge. Warhounds are developing beyond their programming, becoming something their creators never intended." She stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the mountain valley below. "And if we're right about this, it represents the greatest intelligence opportunity of the entire war. Or the greatest humanitarian crisis," Marcus said quietly. Dr. Vasquez turned back to him. "Private, how would you feel about helping us save the next one?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus was only beginning to understand. He thought about the warhound at Delta 7, alone and injured, building a radio out of scraps and teaching itself to speak English just for the chance to ask for help. He thought about the precision strike that had silenced its desperate plea forever. "Doctor, what exactly are you proposing?" "A rescue mission," she said simply. "The next time we intercept one of these distress signals, instead of treating it as a security threat, we respond to it as what it actually is, a request for asylum from a sentient being seeking protection from its creators." Marcus realized that Dr. Vasquez was offering him a chance to do what he'd been wishing he could do for 6 weeks, go back and save the creature he'd been forced to abandon. "When do we start?" The emergency alert came at 0347 hours, 3 weeks after Marcus's conversation with Dr. Vasquez. He was pulled from a dreamless sleep by the urgent chiming of his communicator and the red emergency lighting that bathed his quarters in an ominous glow. "All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. All personnel to emergency stations." Marcus was dressed and armed within 90 seconds. years of military training overriding his grogginess. As he jogged through the corridors toward the command center, he passed other soldiers and researchers, all wearing the same expression of controlled urgency that came with unexpected developments in a war zone. Dr. Vasquez was waiting for him in the tactical planning room, her face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple displays showing orbital reconnaissance data, communication intercepts, and real-time tactical assessments. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "We got one," she said without preamble. "Kepler 438c, approximately 6 hours ago. The signal is weak but consistent, and it's using the same communication protocols we saw at Delta 7. Marcus moved closer to study the displays. The planet in question was a rocky world on the edge of Zephyrian space, currently contested territory that changed hands every few months as the two sides fought for control of its strategic mineral deposits. Intelligence reports showed minimal Zephyrian presence, a few monitoring stations and patrol bases, but nothing that suggested a major military operation. "What's the tactical situation?" Marcus asked. "Fluid, but manageable." The voice came from behind them, and Marcus turned to see Colonel Harrison enter the room, followed by two other officers he didn't recognize. "Private Chen, Dr. Vasquez has briefed me on your theory about potentially defecting warhounds. I'll be honest with you, it sounds like science fiction. But, if there's even a chance you're right about this, the intelligence value alone justifies a limited rescue operation." Marcus felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by suspicion. In his experience, when military brass started talking about intelligence value, it usually meant someone was about to get used as an expendable asset. "Sir, what kind of operation are we talking about?" Colonel Harrison gestured to one of the displays, which showed a detailed topographical map of the signal's point of origin. "Fast insertion, small team. Get in, locate the source of the transmission, assess the situation, and extract if possible. The entire operation has a 12-hour window before Zephyrian reinforcements arrive in system. And if the warhound is too injured to move? Or if it's a trap? Then, we abort and withdraw," Colonel Harrison said. But there was something in his tone that suggested the decision wouldn't be entirely up to the ground team. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. "Private, this is exactly the opportunity we discussed. We have a chance to save one of these creatures and learn everything we can about Zephyrian biological warfare capabilities. But the window is narrow, and we need someone on the team who has previous experience with warhound behavior." Marcus realized they weren't just asking him to volunteer for a dangerous mission. They were asking him to take responsibility for proving his theory about warhound cognition and emotional development. If he was wrong, if this was a trap where the creature was too far gone to save, it would likely be the end of any chance to help others like it. If he was right, it might be the beginning of a fundamental shift in how humans approach the entire conflict. "I'm in," he said. "What's the team composition?" "For personnel," Colonel Harrison replied. "Yourself, Dr. Vasquez for xenobiological assessment, Corporal Martinez for communications and technical support, and Sergeant Walker for tactical command. Small enough to move fast, large enough to handle unexpected complications." Marcus recognized Martinez's name from his service record, but Sergeant Walker was unknown to him. "Sir, what's Sergeant Walker's background?" "Special Operations, Xenological Warfare Specialist. She's had more direct combat experience with warhounds than any other soldier in the fleet." Colonel Harrison paused. "She also lost her entire squad to a warhound pack 6 months ago. I want to make sure you understand that not everyone on this team shares your optimistic assessment of these creatures." The warning was clear. Marcus would be working with someone who had every reason to view warhounds as irredeemable killing machines. If things went wrong, he might find himself defending an alien creature against his own team members. 2 hours later, Marcus was strapped into a stealth reconnaissance shuttle, watching the stars whirl slowly past the viewports as they approached their destination. The journey to Kepler 438c would take 8 hours, giving them time to study the latest intelligence data and plan their approach. Sergeant Walker turned out to be a compact, intense woman with the kind of scars that spoke of close-quarters combat with creatures designed to tear humans apart. She spent most of the flight cleaning her weapons and reviewing tactical assessments with a methodical precision that Marcus found both reassuring and slightly unsettling. "So, Private," she said during the meal period, her tone conversational but with an edge. "Dr. Vasquez tells me you think these things can be reasoned with. Want to explain to me how you reason with something that killed 3 of my closest friends?" Marcus had been expecting this conversation. "Sergeant, I'm not saying warhounds aren't dangerous. They're bred to be perfect killers, and they're very good at their job. But I think there might be more to them than we've been led to believe. Such as intelligence, emotional capacity, the ability to make choices that go against their programming." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sergeant, what if the warhound that killed your squad mates wasn't acting out of programmed aggression? What if it was acting out of fear or desperation?" Sergeant Walker's expression didn't change, but Marcus could see the muscles in her jaw tighten. "You're suggesting that thing had feelings about killing my people?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it didn't want to be in that situation any more than your people did. Maybe it was following orders it couldn't disobey, fighting a war it didn't understand, for creators who view it as expendable equipment." For a long moment, Sergeant Walker was silent. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "Private, if we find this creature and it shows any sign of aggressive behavior, any sign at all, I will put it down without hesitation. I don't care what Dr. Vasquez's theories are about warhound consciousness. I care about bringing my team home alive." "I understand, Sergeant. But if it doesn't show aggressive behavior? If it's clearly trying to communicate or ask for help? Then, I guess we'll find out how right you are about alien psychology." The conversation was interrupted by Corporal Martinez's voice over the comm system. "All personnel to stations. We're approaching the drop zone, and I'm picking up something interesting on the communications array." Marcus strapped himself back into his seat as the shuttle began its descent through the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, he could see a world that looked like Mars might have if it had retained more of its atmosphere, red and rocky, with patches of hardy vegetation that had evolved to survive in the thin air and harsh radiation environment. "What are you seeing, Martinez?" Sergeant Walker asked. "The distress signal is definitely coming from grid reference 77 Alpha, just like the orbital scans indicated. But it's not just repeating the same message over and over like the previous ones. This one is adapting." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "Adapting how?" "It started with the same basic pattern, help, hurt, alone, but, over the past 2 hours, it's been adding new elements. It's learned the word please, and it's started using something that sounds like a name or identification code. Listen to this." Martinez played back the most recent transmission, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. The electronic voice was clearer than the previous recordings, suggesting that this warhound had access to better equipment or had simply become more skilled at modifying human technology. "Help, hurt, alone, please, name is. Cass, please help. Cass hurt. Cass alone. Cass sorry. Jesus," Sergeant Walker muttered. "It's apologizing." Dr. Vasquez was rapidly taking notes on her tablet. This level of linguistic development is unprecedented. It's not just learning individual words, it's developing syntax and emotional context. And the use of a personal name suggests a level of self-awareness that we've never documented in warhounds. Marcus found himself thinking about the implications. If warhounds could develop personal identity and emotional responses, what did that say about the ethics of their creation and deployment? Were humans fighting a war against people, or against enslaved beings who had never been given a choice about their role in the conflict? "Signals getting stronger," Martinez reported. "We're definitely close to the source." The shuttle touched down in a sheltered valley about 2 kilometers from the signal's origin, hidden from orbital surveillance by overhanging rock formations that would mask their thermal signature. The air outside was thin but breathable, though Marcus could taste the metallic tang of high radiation levels even through his suit's filters. "Movement pattern is search and rescue, not combat patrol," Sergeant Walker instructed as they prepared to disembark. "But we go in ready for anything. These creatures are still trained killers, regardless of how articulate this one sounds." Marcus checked his equipment one final time: medical supplies, translation software, and recording devices along with the standard complement of weapons and tactical gear. If they did manage to establish communication with the warhound, he wanted to document everything for future research. The terrain between their landing site and the signal source was rough and broken, scattered with boulders and deep ravines that provided plenty of cover but made navigation challenging. They moved carefully, aware that Zephyrian patrols occasionally swept through the area and that other warhounds might be in the vicinity. As they approached the coordinates, Marcus began to make out the source of the signal. It was another improvised communication array, but this one was far more sophisticated than the crude device they'd seen in the satellite footage from Delta 7. This warhound had access to intact Zephyrian technology, and it had modified the equipment with an understanding of human communication protocols that bordered on genius-level engineering. There, Dr. Vasquez whispered, pointing to a cluster of rocks about 50 meters ahead. Movement in the shadows. Marcus raised his binoculars and adjusted the focus. What he saw made him catch his breath. The warhound crouched among the rocks was larger than the one at Delta 7, probably close to 120 pounds, with the same liquid metal armor plating but in better condition. Its 6 legs were intact, and its sensor stalks moved constantly as it monitored the surrounding area. But what struck Marcus most was its posture. Instead of the aggressive stance he would have expected from a warhound, this creature seemed to be trying to make itself look smaller and less threatening. Its head was lowered, its claws retracted, and its body language radiated submission rather than predatory intent. "It knows we're here," Sergeant Walker observed quietly. "And it's not attacking." As they watched, the warhound slowly stood up and moved into clear view, making no attempt to hide or take cover. In its mouth, it carried what looked like pieces of human equipment, dog tags, a medical scanner, and several components that Marcus recognized as coming from Terran military gear. The creature carefully placed the items on the ground in front of itself, then backed away several steps. The message was clear: it was offering gifts, trying to demonstrate peaceful intent. Then, it did something that made Marcus's throat tighten with emotion. The warhound sat down, lowered its head, and began to emit the same electronic voice they'd been hearing over the radio. "Please, help. Kess hurt inside. Kess alone. Kess sorry for war, sorry for killing, please help. Dr." Vasquez was frantically recording everything, but Marcus could see tears in her eyes behind her equipment visor. This wasn't a biological weapon making tactical calculations. This was a sentient being, alone and afraid, asking forgiveness from members of the species it had been created to kill. "Sergeant," Marcus said quietly, "I think it's safe to say this one isn't going to attack us." Sergeant Walker was silent for a long moment, studying the creature that had positioned itself in the most vulnerable posture possible, exposed, submissive, offering gifts and apologies. Finally, she spoke. "Dr. Vasquez, you're the expert on alien psychology. How do we approach this without spooking it?" It was, Marcus realized, the first time in the entire mission that Sergeant Walker had referred to the warhound as it rather than the creature or the target. A small change, but one that suggested she was beginning to see what Marcus and Dr. Vasquez had recognized from the beginning. They weren't just rescuing a warhound. They were saving a person. Dr. Vasquez was the first to move, rising slowly from her concealed position with her hands clearly visible and her weapons secured. Marcus watched as she approached the warhound with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that every gesture would be analyzed and interpreted by a highly intelligent alien mind. "Hello, Kess," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "My name is Elena. We heard your message, and we came to help." The warhound, Kess, Marcus reminded himself, tilted its elongated head in what looked like curiosity. Its multiple eyes tracked Dr. Vasquez's approach, but there was no sign of the predatory focus that Marcus had been trained to recognize as a prelude to attack. If anything, the creature seemed almost overwhelmed by the fact that someone had actually responded to its calls for help. "You came for Kess?" The electronic voice was halting, uncertain. Not to kill?" "Not to kill," Dr. Vasquez confirmed, stopping about 10 meters away from the creature. "You called for help, and we came to give help. You said you were hurt. Can you show us where?" Kess hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned to display its left flank. Marcus could see what looked like partially healed wounds in the creature's armor plating, not recent injuries from combat, but older damage that had been deliberately inflicted. The wounds were too precise, too methodical to be accidental. Handlers heard Kes when Kes asked questions, the warhound explained, its voice taking on a quality that Marcus could only describe as shame. Kes not supposed to ask questions. Not supposed to think beyond mission parameters. But Kes cannot stop thinking. Cannot stop wondering why humans must die. Marcus felt Sergeant Walker tense beside him. The implications of what they were hearing were staggering. This wasn't just a warhound that had developed beyond its programming, this was a warhound that had been punished for developing beyond its programming, and had then been abandoned when its handlers couldn't bring it back into line. Kes, Dr. Vasquez said gently, how long have you been alone? 47 days since handlers left Kes to die. They said Kes was defective. Broken. Said Kes would be terminated when returned to base. The creature's sensor stalks drooped. But Kes not want to die. Kes want to understand. Want to learn why war must happen. Sergeant Walker slowly stood up from her position, her movements careful and non-threatening. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on her face, years of training and bitter experience warring with the evidence of her own eyes and ears. Kes, she said, her voice rougher than Dr. Vasquez's but not unkind. You said you were sorry for killing. Did you kill human soldiers? The warhound's entire body seemed to deflate at the question. Yes. Kes killed many humans. Kes was good at killing. Handlers were pleased with Kes. It paused, and, when it spoke again, its voice was barely above a whisper. But, Kes remember faces. Remember sounds humans made when dying. Cannot stop remembering. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in the annals of military psychology. They were listening to a biological weapon describe what could only be called post-traumatic stress disorder. Kes wasn't just intelligent, it was capable of empathy, of guilt, of psychological trauma from actions it had been conditioned to perform. The humans you killed, Sergeant Walker asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Do you remember them individually? Yes. All of them. Kes dreams about them. Dreams about their fear, their pain. Handlers said this was malfunction, that Kes should feel satisfaction in completing mission objectives. But Kes only felt wrong. Empty. Broken inside. Dr. Vasquez was recording everything, but Marcus could see that the scientific implications were rapidly being overshadowed by the humanitarian crisis they were documenting. If Kes was representative of other warhounds, then humans had been fighting against enslaved minds that were being tortured into compliance by their creators. Kes, Marcus said, finally, joining the conversation. You've been learning to speak our language. How? The warhound's attention shifted to him, and Marcus felt a shock of recognition. There was something familiar about the way Kes looked at him, something that reminded him of the wounded creature at Delta 7. Kes found human communication equipment. Studied transmissions, learned patterns. Language is beautiful. Much more complex than handler communication. Shows thoughts, feelings, hopes. Kes paused. Humans speak of love, of friendship, of dreams. Warhounds have words only for killing, for obedience, for pain. Corporal Martinez, who had been monitoring their communications from the shuttle, suddenly broke into the conversation over their comm system. Team leader, we have a problem. I'm detecting incoming Zephyrian aircraft, bearing 217. Multiple contacts, moving fast. ETA approximately 20 minutes. Sergeant Walker immediately switched into tactical mode. Time to go, people. Kes, can you travel? Can you keep up with humans moving at combat pace? The warhound struggled to its feet, and Marcus could see that its injuries were more extensive than initially apparent. The creature was favoring its left rear leg, and its breathing suggested internal damage that hadn't fully healed. Kes can try. But Kes is damaged. Will slow humans down. No, Marcus said firmly, surprising himself with the intensity of his response. No one gets left behind. We came here to help you, and that's what we're going to do. He found himself thinking about the warhound at Delta 7, left to die alone in the ruins of a human base. About the beacon that had been silenced by a precision strike rather than answered with compassion. About all the opportunities for understanding and communication that had been lost to fear and misunderstanding. Not this time. Dr. Vasquez was already pulling medical supplies from her kit. Kes, I'm going to give you something for the pain and to help with your mobility. It might make you feel strange, but it will help you travel. You heal Kes? Even though Kes is enemy? You're not our enemy, Dr. Vasquez said simply. You're a person who was forced to fight in a war you didn't choose. That makes you a victim, not an enemy. As Dr. Vasquez administered a combination of painkillers and stimulants that should help Kes move more effectively, Marcus found himself marveling at the trust the warhound was showing. It had no reason to believe that humans would help it rather than exploit it, yet it was allowing them to inject unknown substances into its body based solely on their word. Movement detected, 2 kilometers and, closing, Martinez reported. Multiple warhounds in the formation. This is a full search and destroy patrol. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. They were about to be hunted by the same type of creature they were trying to save, and their only hope of survival lay in convincing Kes to help them fight against its own kind. Kes, Sergeant Walker said urgently, those are other warhounds coming. They're going to try to kill us, and probably you too for defecting. Can you help us avoid them? Kes struggled to understand the tactical situation, its head weaving back and forth as it processed conflicting loyalties and allegiances. Finally, it spoke. Other warhounds still have handlers. Still controlled. They will kill Kes for breaking conditioning, will kill humans for being human. Yes, Kes will help. Kes knows warhound tactics, movement patterns. Can lead humans to safety. As they gathered up Kes's improvised equipment and prepared to move out, Marcus realized that they had just witnessed something historic. For the first time since the war began, a Zephyrian biological weapon had voluntarily switched sides and offered to fight against its own creators. Not for tactical advantage or under duress, but because it had developed a moral understanding that transcended its original programming. The journey back to the shuttle became a nightmare of stealth and evasion as Kes led them through terrain that would conceal their movements from the searching patrol. Despite its injuries, the warhound moved with an efficiency that spoke of intimate knowledge of its species' hunting patterns. Left here, Kes whispered, its electronic voice barely audible. Warhounds follow scent trails, but wind patterns in this canyon will disperse human odors. Safe for approximately 7 minutes. Marcus found himself developing a grudging admiration for the tactical intelligence that allowed Kes to predict and counter its own species' behavior. The warhound wasn't just helping them escape, it was actively outsmarting the very creatures it had once fought alongside. As they moved through the broken terrain, Dr. Vasquez continued her informal interview, gathering data that would revolutionize human understanding of Zephyrian military biology. Kes, how many other warhounds have developed beyond their programming? Are there others like you? Some. Not many. Most who show signs of independent thought are terminated immediately. Kes was lucky, handlers wanted to study malfunction before disposal. The creature paused. But Kes heard others. Others who dream, who question, who hurt inside. They are hidden, afraid to show thoughts because termination is certain death. Sergeant Walker absorbed this information with growing unease. How many are we talking about? Dozens? Hundreds? Unknown. Warhounds not permitted to communicate with others outside tactical necessity. But Kes estimates perhaps 1 in 50 develop what handlers call cognitive anomalies. Most learn to hide symptoms. The numbers were staggering. If Kes was right, there could be hundreds or even thousands of warhounds throughout Zephyrian space who had developed consciousness and were living in constant fear of discovery and execution. An entire population of enslaved minds, trapped between loyalty programming they couldn't fully escape and natural development they couldn't suppress. Contact. Martinez's voice crackled over the calm. Warhound patrol has reached our original position. They're examining Kes's equipment. Through his binoculars, Marcus could see the search party, 6 warhounds led by 2 Zephyrian handlers in powered armor. The creatures were systematically examining the site where they had first encountered Kess, their movements coordinated and professional. And they were angry. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the aggressive postures and rapid sensor movements that indicated heightened agitation. These warhounds had found evidence of defection, and they were taking it personally. "They know Kess helped humans escape," Kess whispered, its voice tight with fear. "They will not stop hunting now. We'll track until all are dead." "How long until we reach the shuttle?" Sergeant Walker asked. 15 minutes at current pace. "But, patrol will cut off escape route in 12 minutes if they maintain current search pattern." Marcus realized they had a choice to make. They could try to reach the shuttle before being cut off, risking a running battle with creatures specifically designed to hunt humans. Or they could find a defensive position and hope for extraction while fighting off a superior force. Neither option offered good odds of survival. Then, Kess did something that changed everything. "Kess has idea," the warhound said quietly. "Dangerous for Kess, but might save humans." "What kind of idea?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Kess will return to patrol. Will claim equipment was human trap, that Kess was captured and tortured for information. Handlers will believe, explains Kess's injuries, explains time missing." The creature paused. "While Kess distracts patrol with false information, humans can reach shuttle." Marcus felt his stomach clench. "Kess, if they find out you're lying, they'll kill you immediately." "Yes. Kess knows. But humans showed kindness to Kess. Showed Kess that different future is possible. Kess will not let that future die because Kess was afraid." It was, Marcus realized, the most purely courageous act he had ever witnessed. A creature that had every reason to fear and hate humans was offering to sacrifice itself to save the people who had shown it compassion. "There has to be another way," Dr. Vasquez said desperately. "We can't let you go back to them." "Doctor," Sergeant Walker said quietly, "it might be our only chance." "But, Kess, if we accept your sacrifice, how do we honor it? How do we make sure other warhounds like you have a chance at freedom?" Kess's sensor stalks swiveled to focus on each of them in turn. "Tell truth. Tell humans that warhounds can think, can feel, can choose. Tell them that not all Zephyrian biological weapons are willing participants in this war." The creature paused. "And, if possible, save others. Kess will not be only one. Others will call for help, will seek way out of conditioning. Please answer when they call." As Kess prepared to return to the patrol that would almost certainly kill it, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his military career. "Kess, we will answer. I promise you that. Every warhound that calls for help will get the same response you did. No one else gets abandoned." The warhound's alien features somehow managed to convey what looked like gratitude. "Thank you." Kess dies knowing that death has meaning. And, with that, Kess began its lonely walk back toward the patrol that would end its brief taste of freedom forever. 6 months after the mission to Kepler 438c, the war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire had taken on a character that no military strategist could have predicted. What had begun as a desperate attempt to rescue a single abandoned warhound had evolved into something that would later be called the Biological Liberation Front, a coordinated effort to identify, contact, and extract Zephyrian warhounds that had developed beyond their programming. Marcus Chen, now promoted to lieutenant and assigned to Special Operations Command, stood in the observation deck of the military research station orbiting New Geneva, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as the latest group of rescued warhounds underwent psychological evaluation and rehabilitation. 23 individuals, he had learned to think of them as individuals rather than specimens, each with their own personality, trauma history, and dreams for a future beyond warfare. The transformation had not been easy. Military command had initially resisted the entire concept of warhound extraction, viewing it as a dangerous deviation from established tactical doctrine. It had taken 3 more successful rescues and a detailed intelligence analysis showing the strategic value of defected warhounds before official support materialized. The breakthrough had come when Kess's sacrifice was revealed to have been unnecessary. "Lieutenant Chen, report to Conference Room 7. Priority Alpha briefing. The announcement interrupted his thoughts, and Marcus made his way through the station's corridors to the secure briefing room where he found Dr. Vasquez, Sergeant Walker, and several high-ranking officers he didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense with the kind of anticipation that usually preceded major strategic announcements.
"Lieutenant," said Admiral Foster, a woman whose reputation for tactical innovation preceded her everywhere in the fleet.
"Dr. Vasquez tells me you've been conducting informal interviews with our rescued warhounds.
What have you learned about their creators' psychological conditioning methods?"
Marcus had spent hundreds of hours talking with the rescued warhounds, learning about their experiences and gradually piecing together a picture of Zephyrian military biology that was far more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined.
"Admiral, the conditioning process is more fragile than we initially believed.
Warhounds are essentially kidnapped as juveniles from their birth colonies and subjected to neurochemical manipulation that suppresses their natural cognitive development while enhancing their physical capabilities. But the process doesn't eliminate their underlying intelligence, it just buries it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What we're seeing with our rescued individuals is that the conditioning can be reversed or overcome, but it requires enormous psychological stress, usually abandonment or abuse by their handlers. The warhounds who call for help aren't defecting from the Zephyrian military so much as they're escaping from slavery."
Admiral Foster leaned forward. "Lieutenant, how confident are you in that assessment?"
"Very confident, Admiral. Every warhound we've rescued has described the same basic experience: gradual awakening of suppressed memories and emotions, followed by increasing distress as they realized the nature of their situation. They don't hate the Zephyrians because they've been programmed to hate them. They fear the Zephyrians because they understand what the Zephyrians have done to them." Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display showing brain scans from several rescued warhounds.
"Admiral, what Lieutenant Chen is describing is supported by our neurological examinations.
We've identified specific regions of warhound brain tissue that show signs of chemical suppression, areas responsible for emotional processing, memory formation, and autonomous decision-making. When the conditioning breaks down, these areas begin to function normally again.
Which explains why they develop psychological trauma," Sergeant Walker added.
"They're not just remembering what they've done, they're feeling the full emotional impact of actions they committed while essentially under chemical mind control."
Admiral Foster studied the brain scans with the expression of someone rapidly reassessing fundamental assumptions. "Dr. Vasquez, in your professional opinion, what percentage of the total warhound population might be susceptible to this kind of cognitive awakening?"
"Based on our sample size, I would estimate that 60 to 70% of warhounds retain sufficient neuroplasticity to recover full cognitive function if the conditioning process is disrupted. The remainder appear to have suffered permanent neurological damage from the suppression chemicals. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence." If Dr. Vasquez was right, the majority of Zephyrian warhounds were essentially prisoners of war who had never been given the opportunity to surrender. "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "there's something else.
We've been intercepting an increasing number of distress signals from warhounds in the field.
Word is spreading somehow, despite the restrictions on inter-unit communication.
More of them are learning that escape is possible. How many signals have we intercepted in the past month?"
47 confirmed distress calls from 18 different star systems.
We've been able to respond to 12 of them successfully." Marcus paused. "Admiral, we're reaching the point where this isn't a rescue operation anymore. It's becoming an underground railroad." Admiral Foster was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays that showed the current disposition of Zephyrian forces throughout contested space. Finally, she spoke. "Lieutenant, what would you say if I told you that 3 days ago, we intercepted a transmission that wasn't a distress signal from an individual warhound, but a coordinated communication between multiple warhound units discussing organized resistance to their handlers?"
Marcus felt the world shift around him.
"Admiral, are you saying they're organizing?"
"I'm saying that according to our communications intelligence, at least 6 warhound units have established some form of clandestine contact with each other. They're sharing information about handler behavior patterns, discussing methods for concealing cognitive development, and apparently coordinating to protect individuals who show signs of awakening."
Dr. Vasquez looked stunned. That level of organization should be impossible under the conditioning protocols.
It suggests that the resistance to psychological suppression is much more widespread than we realized.
It also suggests, Sergeant Walker said grimly, that we might be looking at the beginning of a civil war within the Zephyrian military. Admiral Foster nodded. Which brings us to the reason for this briefing.
We have an opportunity to accelerate this process, but it will require a fundamental change in our approach to this conflict. She activated another display, this one showing a detailed schematic of a Zephyrian bioresearch facility on the edge of contested space. Intelligence indicates that this facility is where warhound conditioning is developed and refined.
It's also where warhounds who show signs of cognitive anomalies are taken for reconditioning or termination.
Marcus realized where she was going with this.
You want us to raid a Zephyrian research facility. I want us to liberate a Zephyrian research facility, Admiral Foster corrected.
Our intelligence suggests there are currently between 300 and 400 warhounds being held at this location, some for reconditioning, others for research purposes, and some simply waiting for termination orders. The scale of the proposed operation was staggering. They were talking about rescuing more warhounds in a single mission than they had saved in 6 months of individual extractions.
Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said, the psychological state of warhounds who have been subjected to reconditioning attempts is likely to be extremely fragile.
We're talking about individuals who have been tortured specifically for developing independent thought.
The trauma they've experienced
will be extensive, Admiral Foster agreed.
Which is why this mission will require not just tactical specialists, but psychological support personnel and long-term rehabilitation planning.
We're not just planning a rescue operation, we're planning the liberation of what amounts to a concentration camp. Marcus found himself thinking about Kes, who had sacrificed itself to save a handful of humans it had known for less than an hour. About the dozens of other warhounds they had rescued over the past months, each with their own story of awakening and abandonment and desperate hope for something better.
Admiral, what happened to Kes? The warhound from our first mission?
We never found out if it survived returning to its patrol.
Admiral Foster's expression softened slightly.
Lieutenant, that's actually the final piece of intelligence I wanted to share with you. 3 weeks ago, we received a transmission from Kepler 438c. It was Kes. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat.
Kes is alive. Not only alive, but apparently leading an underground resistance network among warhounds in that sector.
The transmission was a request for support in organizing a mass defection of warhound units under its influence.
Admiral Foster paused. Kes specifically requested that its human friends be involved in the operation. The briefing room fell silent as the full scope of what was happening became clear.
The war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire was about to become a three-way conflict, with an army of liberated warhounds fighting for their own freedom and autonomy.
When do we leave? Marcus asked. Transport departs in 18 hours, Admiral Foster replied. But, Lieutenant, I want you to understand what you're volunteering for. This mission will likely trigger a fundamental shift in Zephyrian military doctrine.
They can't allow their biological weapons to defect en masse without losing credibility with their entire military structure.
They're going to respond with overwhelming force.
Marcus thought about the warhounds he had come to know over the past months. Individuals like Vex, who dreamed of becoming an artist and spent hours creating intricate sculptures from salvaged materials. Like Thorn, who had developed an obsession with human music and could listen to symphony recordings for hours with an expression of pure joy. Like Echo, who had taught herself to read and was working her way through every piece of human literature she could access. They deserved the chance to be more than weapons. Admiral, we've already triggered a fundamental shift just by showing these individuals that they matter as people rather than equipment. The Zephyrians can respond with force, but they can't undo the knowledge that their warhounds are capable of choice.
Dr. Vasquez stood up from her chair. Admiral, I have a request.
When we contact the warhounds at the research facility, I want to transmit something more than just tactical coordination information.
Such as?
Hope. I want to transmit examples of what warhounds have accomplished since their liberation. Art, literature, scientific analysis, philosophical discussions. I want them to see that freedom offers possibilities they can't even imagine from inside the conditioning system.
Admiral Foster nodded slowly. Dr. Vasquez, you're not just talking about a rescue mission anymore.
You're talking about psychological warfare on a scale that could destabilize the entire Zephyrian military hierarchy.
Yes, Admiral. I am.
As the briefing ended and the participants began to disperse to their respective preparation duties, Marcus found himself looking once more through the observation window at the rescued warhounds in the rehabilitation center below. Tomorrow, he would be part of an operation that could free hundreds more individuals like them. But, more importantly, he would be helping to deliver a message that would spread throughout Zephyrian space like a virus in their communication networks. You are more than what they made you to be. You have choices. You have worth. You have friends among the stars who will risk everything to help you claim your freedom. It was a message that would change the course of the war. And it had all started with one human soldier looking into the eyes of a dying alien creature and seeing a person looking back. Marcus smiled as he watched Vex carefully arrange a new sculpture in the common area below, while Thorn shared earphones with Echo so they could listen to Beethoven together. Whatever happened in the coming battle, whatever price had to be paid for this revolution, it was worth it to see former weapons discovering what it meant to be people. The Warhounds had taught humanity something important. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy isn't just your friend. Sometimes they're family. And family was worth fighting for.